Welcome to News West 9's West Texas View with Johnny Lou Avery.
Welcome to the West Texas View. I'm Johnny Lou Avery, and last Sunday you met Bill Brandt and Larry Sanders. They are officials from the Herald of Truth, and the Herald of Truth is an international organization with one mission only, and that's to fulfill the Great Commission and take it to all peoples of the world. And they're doing this in a number of ways. That they will soon, in fact next month, be celebrating their 60th anniversary. It started as a dream in two people's minds and has mushroomed now into a worldwide organization that uses many sources for the single purpose, and that's to take the message of Jesus to the world. And they're primarily doing that through meeting the cultures where they are and not trying to convert them into being little Americans, but to be who they are where they are. And they use a lot of tools. And we're going to concentrate on Cuba today and talk about how it actually has come about there. So Bill and Larry, thank you so much for coming back. We enjoyed meeting you last Sunday and hearing all about your background, and we're glad that you're Yankees who've converted to Texan, and you've done a good job at that. But I want you to just introduce how now this has grown to the point that you've gone out into other countries, and your most sophisticated programs are in Africa and Cuba. Is that correct?
That's a fair assessment.
And the foreign countries, and the most prolific. And so now start us with your journey into Cuba.
Our journey into Cuba began with Juan Antonio Monroy, who is our longest serving employee, joined Herald of Truth in 1964. Juan is an interesting gentleman. He is both a preacher as well as a journalist / writer. I didn't know how to exactly put all that together. And lives in Spain.
But started out as a journalist.
Started out as a writer-journalist. In Europe, they put those together. In the United States, we tend to separate those.
And he's from Spain and not Cuba.
He's from Spain.
Okay. Right.
Born in Morocco, North Africa. And so while he was in Morocco, his father was French, his mother was Spanish. He speaks both languages fluently. He was converted by a Cuban missionary. A man from Cuba taught Juan the words of Jesus. Flash forward.
And he was a Marxist.
He was an atheist Marxist.
Okay.
And his intent was to prove this guy wrong. In fact, he said, I was going to prove him wrong. He was wrong. God is dead. There is nothing. And so he started studying with this Cuban missionary in an attempt to show him all the faults. Wound up being converted to Jesus. Flash forward to 1985, Nicaragua. Daniel Ortega is being inaugurated as president, the same Daniel Ortega who is now the president of Nicaragua again. Daniel Ortega is inaugurated the first time. Juan Antonio Monroy, as a journalist, is invited. Also Fidel Castro. For 2 years, Juan says he's been trying to go to Cuba, going to the embassy, and they reject him. We do not want you there, Monroy. Juan's direct quote.
And this was in a meeting. I mean, this wasn't.
It was one of those open-air conversations with supposedly the two presidents, Ortega and Fidel Castro.
The journalist.
And the journalists who were there. And Juan Antonio Monroy said, El Presidente, why don't you have religious freedom in Cuba? And Fidel ignored him. And evidently, El Presidente, why can't you let me come in and see? Ignored him. Finally, he said, Presidente, are you afraid of religious freedom? And evidently, Fidel had had enough, and he finally looked at him and said, boy, who are you? I'm Juan Antonio Monroy. How do you know there is not religious freedom? You need to come there and see. He said, I have tried. For 2 years, you won't let me in. And Juan tells the story and says Fidel looked at him very hard and said, try again. Juan goes back to Madrid, goes to the Cuban embassy. He's met by a guy at the window and says, Monroy, we don't want you to come into Cuba. No, I have been invited. Who invited you? El Presidente Fidel Castro. Oh. Oh. And so Juan tells a story, says in 2 weeks he had his visa to go to Cuba. And he became the first Christian preacher into Cuba since the revolution, 25 years earlier. And that starts our Herald of Truth's involvement with Cuba when he made his first visit, because he was our employee and started talking to people. He says that there is a division based on the revolution. It's pre-revolution and post-revolution. And when I went, I saw that. You can see some buildings are relatively new, but most of the buildings are old and falling apart. We talk a lot about the cars that are there.
Yeah.
And they're there. I mean, there are 1940s, 1950s, early 60 cars, GM cars, Ford cars, and some are still in pristine condition. Most have been modified. I mean, after X number of years, they start to fall apart. So you may see the back end of a 52 Chevrolet or 54 Chevrolet and has old Oldsmobile lights on top of it because that's how they worked them. We have felt those kind of things from America because those are the things that we've heard about. The U.S. has an embargo, still does. Herald of Truth was allowed and has been allowed, licensed by our government to go to Cuba. The U.S. Treasury Department lets us do that. That law, by the way, has been changed by the Obama administration. We no longer have to have a license, we just have to have a letter saying that so-and-so, Larry Sanders, is a member of a religious organization entitled Herald of Truth. And that gets us to go to Cuba. When you're in Cuba, you have to have what's called a religious visa, which allows you to speak to people about God. And because we have that license or that letter, they issue us a religious visa, so we can go and talk to people. We have a native...
So you hurdled 2 big hurdles right there. He got into the Cuba, and then
we were
able to
get
do
in as
all
well.
these others.
Huge. We have a representative in Cuba, have for the last 16 years, by the name of Tony Fernandez, Cuban national, preacher, runs a church in Matanzas. And Tony has allowed us to accomplish a great deal of things. And there's more to that story.
Because again, he knows what's going to be the most effective way to reach them. Okay, we're going to have to take a break, so that's a perfect break in this. But you're seeing how things are unfolding, I think, in God's time, and being available to those people, and the reception has been great. We'll be right back after the break and continue this story.
Stay tuned. West Texas View will be right back.